I was to have an early breakfast and start at dawn, for that was the usual way, but I had the demon's own time with my armor, and this delayed me a little. It is troublesome to get into, and there is so much detail. First you wrap a layer or two of blanket around your body, for a sort of cushion and to keep off the cold iron. Then you put on your sleeves and shirt of chain mail. These are made of small steel links woven together, and they form a fabric so flexible that if you toss your shirt onto the floor, it slumps into a pile like a peck of wet fishnet. It is very heavy and is nearly the uncomfortablest material in the world for a night shirt, yet plenty used it for that, tax collectors and reformers and one-horse kings with a defective title and those sorts of people. Then you put on your shoes, flatboats roofed over with interleaving bands of steel, and screw your clumsy spurs into the heels. Next you buckle your greaves on your legs and your cuisses on your thighs, then come your backplate and your breastplate, and you begin to feel crowded. Then you hitch onto the breastplate the half-petticoat of broad overlapping bands of steel, which hangs down in front, but is scalloped out behind so you can sit down, and isn't any real improvement on an inverted coal scuttle, either for looks or for wear or to wipe your hands on. Next you belt on your sword, then you put your stovepipe joints onto your arms, your iron gauntlets onto your hands, your iron rat trap onto your head, with a rag of steel web hitched onto it to hang over the back of your neck. And there you are, snug as a candle in a candle mold. This is no time to dance. Well, a man that is packed away like that is a nut that isn't worth the cracking. There is so little of the meat, when you get down to it, by comparison with the shell. The boys helped me, or I never could have got in. Just as we finished, Sir Bedivere happened in, and I saw that as like as not I hadn't chosen the most convenient outfit for a long trip. How stately he looked, and tall and broad and grand. He had on his head a conical steel casque that only came down to his ears, and for visor had only a narrow steel bar that extended down to his upper lip and protected his nose. And all the rest of him, from neck to heel, was flexible chain mail, trousers and all. But pretty much all of him was hidden under his outside garment, which of course was of chain mail, as I said, and hung straight from his shoulders to his ankles, and from his middle to the bottom, both before and behind, was divided, so that he could ride and let the skirts hang down on each side. He was going grailing, and it was just the outfit for it, too. I would have given a good deal for that ulster, but it was too late now to be fooling around. The sun was just up. The king and the court were all on hand to see me off and wish me luck, so it wouldn't be etiquette for me to tarry. You don't get on your horse yourself. No, if you tried it, you would get disappointed. They carry you out, just as they carry a sunstruck man to the drugstore and put you on and help get you to rights and fix your feet in the stirrups. And all the while you do feel so strange and stuffy and like somebody else, like somebody that has been married on a sudden or struck by lightning or something like that and hasn't quite fetched around yet and is sort of numb and can't just get his bearings. Then they stood up the mast they called a spear in its socket by my left foot, and I gripped it with my hand. Lastly, they hung my shield around my neck, and I was all complete and ready to up anchor and get to sea. Everybody was as good to me as they could be, and a maid of honor gave me the stirrup cup her own self. There was nothing more to do now, but for that damsel to get up behind me on a pillion, which she did, and put an arm or so around me to hold on. And so we started, and everybody gave us a goodbye and waved their handkerchiefs or helmets, and everybody we met, going down the hill and through the village, was respectful to us, except some shabby little boys on the outskirts. They said, "Oh, what a guy," and hove clods at us. In my experience, boys are the same in all ages. They don't respect anything, they don't care for anything or anybody. They say go up, baldhead, to the prophet going his unoffending way in the grey of antiquity. They sass me in the holy gloom of the Middle Ages, and I had seen them act the same way in Buchanan's administration. I remember, because I was there and helped. The prophet had his bears and settled with his boys, and I wanted to get down and settle with mine, but it wouldn't answer because I couldn't have got up again. I hate a country without a derrick. Chapter 12. Slow Torture. Straight off, we were in the country. It was most lovely and pleasant in those sylvan solitudes in the early cool morning, in the first freshness of autumn. From hilltops we saw fair green valleys lying spread out below, with streams winding through them, and island groves of trees here and there, and huge, lonely oaks scattered about and casting black blots of shade. and beyond the valleys we saw the ranges of hills, blue with haze, stretching away in billowy perspective to the horizon, with at wide intervals a dim fleck of white or grey on a wave summit, which we knew was a castle. We crossed broad natural lawns sparkling with dew, and we moved like spirits, the cushioned turf giving out no sound of footfall. We dreamed along through glades in a mist of green light that got its tint from the sun-drenched roof of leaves overhead, and by our feet, the clearest and coldest of runlets went frisking and gossiping over its reefs and making a sort of whispering music, comfortable to hear. And at times we left the world behind and entered into the solemn, great deeps and rich gloom of the forest, where furtive wild things whisked and scurried by and were gone before you could even get your eye on the place where the noise was, and where only the earliest birds were turning out and getting to business with a song here and a quarrel yonder, and a mysterious far-off hammering and drumming for worms on a tree trunk away somewhere in the impenetrable remotenesses of the woods. And by out, we would swing again into the glare. About the third or fourth or fifth time that we swung out into the glare, it was along there somewhere, a couple of hours or so after sunup. It wasn't as pleasant as it had been. It was beginning to get hot. This was quite noticeable. We had a very long pull after that without any shade. Now it is curious how progressively little frets grow and multiply after they once get a start. Things which I didn't mind at all at first, I began to mind now, and more too, all the time. The first 10 or 15 times I wanted my handkerchief, I didn't seem to care. I got along and said, never mind, it isn't any matter, and dropped it out of my mind. But now it was different. I wanted it all the time. It was nag, 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 right along and no rest. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And so at last I lost my temper and said, hang a man that would make a suit of armor without any pockets in it. You see, I had my handkerchief in my helmet and some other things, but it was that kind of a helmet that you can't take off by yourself. That hadn't occurred to me when I put it there, and in fact, I didn't know it. I supposed it would be particularly convenient there. And so now, the thought of its being there, so handy and close by, and yet not get-atable, made it all the worse and the harder to bear. Yes, the thing that you can't get is the thing that you want, mainly. Everyone has noticed that. Well, it took my mind off from everything else, took it clear off, and centered it in my helmet, and mile after mile, there it stayed, imagining the handkerchief, picturing the handkerchief, and it was bitter and aggravating to have the salt sweat keep trickling down into my eyes, and I couldn't get at it. It seems like a little thing on paper, but it was not a little thing at all. It was the most real kind of misery. I would not say it if it was not so. I made up my mind that I would carry along a reticule next time, let it look how it might, and people say what they would. Of course these iron dudes of the round table would think it was scandalous, and maybe raise Sheol about it, but as for me, give me comfort first and style afterwards. So we jogged along, and now and then we struck a stretch of dust, and it would tumble up in clouds and get into my nose and make me sneeze and cry, and of course I said things I oughtn't to have said. I don't deny that. I am not better than others. We couldn't seem to meet anybody in this lonesome Britain, not even an ogre, and in the mood I was in then, it was well for the ogre. That is, an ogre with a handkerchief. Most knights would have thought of nothing but getting his armor, but so I got his bandana, he could keep his hardware for all of me. Meantime, it was getting hotter and hotter in there. You see, the sun was beating down and warming up the iron more and more all the time. Well, when you are hot, that way, every little thing irritates you. When I trotted, I rattled like a crate of dishes, and that annoyed me. And moreover, I couldn't seem to stand that shield slatting and banging, now about my breast, now around my back. And if I dropped into a walk, my joints creaked and screeched in that wearisome way that a wheelbarrow does, and as we didn't create any breeze at that gate, I was like to get fried in that stove. And besides, the quieter you went, the heavier the iron settled down on you, and the more and more tons you seemed to weigh every minute. And you had to be always changing hands, and passing your spear over to the other foot. It got so irksome for one hand to hold it long at a time. Well, you know, when you perspire that way in rivers, there comes a time when you itch. You are inside, your hands are outside, so there you are, nothing but iron between. It is not a light thing, let it sound as it may. First it is one place, then another, then some more, and it goes on spreading and spreading, and at last the territory is all occupied, and nobody can imagine what you feel like, nor how unpleasant it is. And when it had got to the worst, and it seemed to me that I could not stand anything more. A fly got in through the bars and settled on my nose, and the bars were stuck and wouldn't work, and I couldn't get the visor up, and I could only shake my head, which was baking hot by this time, and the fly. Well, you know how a fly acts when he has got a certainty. He only minded the shaking enough to change from nose to lip, and lip to ear, and buzz all around in there and keep on lighting and biting in a way that a person, already so distressed as I was, simply could not stand. So I gave in and got Alison to unship the helmet and relieve me of it. Then she emptied the conveniences out of it and fetched it full of water, and I drank and then stood up, and she poured the rest down inside the armor. One cannot think how refreshing it was. She continued to fetch and pour until I was well soaked and thoroughly comfortable. It was good to have a rest and peace, but nothing is quite perfect in this life at any time. I had made a pipe a while back, and also some pretty fair tobacco, not the real thing, but what some of the Indians use, the inside bark of the willow, dried. These comforts had been in the helmet, and now I had them again, but no matches. Gradually, as the time wore along, one annoying fact was borne in upon my understanding, that we were weather-bound. An armed novice cannot mount his horse without help and plenty of it. Sandy was not enough for me anyway. We had to wait until somebody should come along. Waiting, in silence, would have been agreeable enough, for I was full of matter for reflection and wanted to give it a chance to work. I wanted to try and think out how it was that rational or even half-rational men could ever have learned to wear armor, considering its inconveniences, and how they had managed to keep up such a fashion for generations when it was plain that what I had suffered today they had had to suffer all the days of their lives. I wanted to think that out, and moreover I wanted to think out some way to reform this evil and persuade the people to let the foolish fashion die out, but thinking was out of the question in the circumstances. You couldn't think where Sandy was. She was a quite biddable creature and good-hearted, but she had a flow of talk that was as steady as a mill and made your head sore like the drays and wagons in a city. If she had had a cork, she would have been a comfort. But you can't cork that kind, they would die. Her clack was going all day, and you would think something would surely happen to her works by and by, but no, they never got out of order, and she never had to slack up for words. She could grind and pump and churn and buzz by the week, and never stop to oil up or blow out. And yet the result was just nothing but wind. She never had any ideas any more than a fog has. She was a perfect blatherskite, I mean for jaw, talk, jabber, but just as good as she could be. I hadn't minded her mill that morning, on account of having that hornet's nest of other troubles, but more than once in the afternoon I had to say, "Take a rest, child. The way you are using up all the domestic air, the kingdom will have to go to importing it by tomorrow, and it's a low enough treasury without that." Chapter 13. Free Men. Yes, it is strange how little a while, at a time, a person can be contented. Only a little while back, when I was writing and suffering, what a heaven this peace, this rest, this sweet serenity in this secluded shady nook by this purling stream would have seemed, where I could keep perfectly comfortable all the time by pouring a dipper of water into my armor now and then. Yet already I was getting dissatisfied, partly because I could not light my pipe, for, although I had long ago started a match factory, I had forgotten to bring matches with me, and partly because we had nothing to eat. Here was another illustration of the childlike improvidence of this age and people. A man in armor always trusted to chance for his food on a journey, and would have been scandalized at the idea of hanging a basket of sandwiches on his spear. There was probably not a knight of all the round table combination who would not rather have died than been caught carrying such a thing as that on his flagstaff. And yet there could not be anything more sensible. It had been my intention to smuggle a couple of sandwiches into my helmet, but I was interrupted in the act, and had to make an excuse and lay them aside, and a dog got them. Night approached, and with it a storm. The darkness came on fast. We must camp, of course. I found a good shelter for the demoiselle under a rock, and went off and found another for myself. But I was obliged to remain in my armor, because I could not get it off by myself, and yet could not allow Alison to help, because it would have seemed so like undressing before folk. It would not have amounted to that in reality, because I had clothes on underneath. But the prejudices of one's breeding are not gotten rid of just at a jump, and I knew that when it came to stripping off that bob-tailed iron petticoat, I should be embarrassed. With the storm came a change of weather, and the stronger the wind blew and the wilder the rain lashed around, the colder and colder it got. Pretty soon, various kinds of bugs and ants and worms and things began to flock in out of the wet and crawl down inside my armor to get warm. And while some of them behaved well enough and snuggled up amongst my clothes and got quiet, the majority were of a restless, uncomfortable sort and never stayed still, but went on prowling and hunting for they did not know what, especially the ants, which went tickling along in wearisome procession from one end of me to the other by the hour, and are a kind of creatures which I never wish to sleep with again. It would be my advice to persons situated in this way to not roll or thrash around, because this excites the interest of all the different sorts of animals, and makes every last one of them want to turn out and see what is going on, and this makes things worse than they were before, and of course makes you objurgate harder. 2. If you can. Still, if one did not roll and thrash around he would die, so perhaps it is as well to do one way as the other. There is no real choice. Even after I was frozen solid, I could still distinguish that tickling, just as a corpse does when he is taking electric treatment. I said I would never wear armor after this trip. All those trying hours whilst I was frozen and yet was in a living fire, as you may say, on account of that swarm of crawlers, that same unanswerable question kept circling and circling through my tired head. How do people stand this miserable armor? How have they managed to stand it all these generations? How can they sleep at night for dreading the tortures of next day? When the morning came at last, I was in a bad enough plight, seedy, drowsy, fagged from want of sleep, weary from thrashing around, famished from long fasting, pining for a bath and to get rid of the animals, and crippled with rheumatism. And how had it fared with the nobly born, the titled aristocrat, the demoiselle Alison la Cartelois? Why, she was as fresh as a squirrel, she had slept like the dead, and as for a bath, probably neither she nor any other noble in the land had ever had one, and so she was not missing it. Measured by modern standards, they were merely modified savages, those people. This noble lady showed no impatience to get to breakfast, and that smacks of the savage, too. On their journeys, those Britons were used to long fasts and knew how to bear them, and also how to freight up against probable fasts before starting, after the style of the Indian and the anaconda. As like as not, Sandy was loaded for a 3-day stretch. And yet, by ingenious contrivance, this gilded minority, instead of being in the tail of the procession where it belonged, was marching head up and banners flying at the other end of it, had elected itself to be the nation, and these innumerable clams had permitted it so long that they had come at last to accept it as a truth, and not only that, but to believe it right and as it should be. The priests had told their fathers and themselves that this ironical state of things was ordained of God, and so, not reflecting upon how unlike God it would be to amuse himself with sarcasms, and especially such poor transparent ones as this, they had dropped the matter there and become respectfully quiet. The talk of these meek people had a strange enough sound in a formerly American ear. They were freemen, but they could not leave the estates of their lord or their bishop without his permission. They could not prepare their own bread, but must have their corn ground and their bread baked at his mill and his bakery, and pay roundly for the same. They could not sell a piece of their own property without paying him a handsome percentage of the proceeds, nor buy a piece of somebody else's without remembering him in cash for the privilege. They had to harvest his grain for him gratis, and be ready to come at a moment's notice, leaving their own crop to destruction by the threatened storm. They had to let him plant fruit trees in their fields, and then keep their indignation to themselves when his heedless fruit-gatherers trampled the grain around the trees. They had to smother their anger when his hunting parties galloped through their fields, laying waste the result of their patient toil. They were not allowed to keep doves themselves, and when the swarms from my lord's dovecotes settled on their crops, they must not lose their temper and kill a bird, for awful would the penalty be. When the harvest was at last gathered, then came the procession of robbers to levy their blackmail upon it. First the church carted off its fat 10th, then the king's commissioner took his 20th, then my lord's people made a mighty inroad upon the remainder. After which, the skinned freeman had liberty to bestow the remnant in his barn, in case it was worth the trouble. There were taxes, and taxes, and taxes, and more taxes, and taxes again, and yet other taxes, upon this free and independent pauper, but none upon his lord the baron or the bishop, none upon the wasteful nobility or the all-devouring church. If the baron would sleep unvexed, the freeman must sit up all night after his day's work and whip the ponds to keep the frogs quiet, if the freeman's daughter. But no, that last infamy of monarchical government is unprintable. And finally, if the freeman, grown desperate with his tortures, found his life unendurable under such conditions, and sacrificed it and fled to death for mercy and refuge, the gentle church condemned him to eternal fire. The gentle law buried him at midnight at the crossroads with a stake through his back. And his master, the baron, or the bishop, confiscated all his property and turned his widow and his orphans out of doors. And here were these freemen assembled in the early morning to work on their lord. The bishops rode 3 days each gratis, every head of a family and every son of a family, 3 days each, gratis, and a day or so added for their servants. Why, it was like reading about France and the French, before the ever-memorable and blessed Revolution, which swept 1,000 years of such villainy away in one swift tidal wave of blood. 1. A settlement of that hoary debt, in the proportion of half a drop of blood for each hogshead of it that had been pressed by slow tortures out of that people in the weary stretch of 10 centuries of wrong and shame, and misery the like of which was not to be mated but in hell. There were 2 reigns of terror, if we would but remember it and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 10,000 persons, the other upon 100 millions. But our shudders are all for the horrors of the minor terror, the momentary terror, so to speak. Whereas, what is the horror of swift death by the axe, compared with lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak? What is swift death by lightning compared with death by slow fire at the stake? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by that brief terror, which we have all been so diligently taught to shiver at and mourn over. But all France could hardly contain the coffins filled by that older and real terror, that unspeakably bitter and awful terror, which none of us has been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves. These poor ostensible freemen who were sharing their breakfast and their talk with me were as full of humble reverence for their king and church and nobility as their worst enemy could desire. There was something pitifully ludicrous about it. I asked them if they supposed a nation of people ever existed, who, with a free vote in every man's hand, would elect that a single family and its descendants should reign over it forever, whether gifted or boobies, to the exclusion of all other families, including the voters, and would also elect that a certain 100 families should be raised to dizzy summits of rank, and clothed on with offensive transmissible glories and privileges to the exclusion of the rest of the nation's families, including his own. They all looked unhit and said they didn't know, that they had never thought about it before, and it hadn't ever occurred to them that a nation could be so situated that every man could have a say in the government. I said I had seen one, and that it would last until it had an established church. Again, they were all unhit at first, but presently one man looked up and asked me to state that proposition again, and state it slowly so it could soak into his understanding. I did it, and after a little he had the idea, and he brought his fist down and said he didn't believe a nation where every man had a vote would voluntarily get down in the mud and dirt in any such way, and that to steal from a nation its will and preference must be a crime and the first of all crimes. I said to myself, this one's a man. If I were backed by enough of his sort, I would make a strike for the welfare of this country and try to prove myself its loyalist citizen by making a wholesome change in its system of government. You see, my kind of loyalty was loyalty to one's country, not to its institutions or its office holders. The country is the real thing, the substantial thing, the eternal thing. It is the thing to watch over and care for and be loyal to. Institutions are extraneous. They are its mere clothing, and clothing can wear out, become ragged, cease to be comfortable, cease to protect the body from winter, disease, and death. To be loyal to rags, to shout for rags, to worship rags, to die for rags, that is a loyalty of unreason. It is pure animal. It belongs to monarchy, was invented by monarchy. Let monarchy keep it. I was from Connecticut, whose constitution declares that all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit, and that they have at all times an undeniable and indefeasible right to alter their form of government in such a manner as they may think expedient. Under that gospel, the citizen who thinks he sees that the Commonwealth's political clothes are worn out, and yet holds his peace and does not agitate for a new suit, is disloyal. He is a traitor. That he may be the only one who thinks he sees this decay does not excuse him. It is his duty to agitate anyway, and it is the duty of the others to vote him down if they do not see the matter as he does. And now here I was, in a country where a right to say how the country should be governed was restricted to 6 persons in each 1,000 of its population. For the 994 to express dissatisfaction with the regnant system and propose to change it would have made the whole 6 shudder as one man. It would have been so disloyal, so dishonorable, such putrid black treason. So to speak, I was become a stockholder in a corporation where 994 of the members furnished all the money and did all the work, and the other 6 elected themselves a permanent board of direction and took all the dividends. It seemed to me that what the 994 dupes needed was a new deal. The thing that would have best suited the circus side of my nature would have been to resign the boss-ship and get up an insurrection and turn it into a revolution. But I knew that the Jack Cade or the Wat Tyler who tries such a thing without first educating his materials up to revolution grade is almost absolutely certain to get left. I had never been accustomed to getting left, even if I do say it myself. Wherefore, the deal, which had been for some time working into shape in my mind, was of a quite different pattern from the Cade-Tyler sort. So I did not talk blood and insurrection to that man there who sat munching black bread with that abused and mistaught herd of human sheep, but took him aside and talked matter of another sort to him. After I had finished, I got him to lend me a little ink from his veins, and with this and a sliver I wrote on a piece of bark, "Put him in the manufactory," and gave it to him and said, "Take it to the palace at Camelot and give it into the hands of Amyas le Poulet, whom I call Clarence, and he will understand." "He is a priest, then," said the man, and some of the enthusiasm went out of his face. "How a priest? Didn't I tell you that no chattel of the church, no bondslave of pope or bishop can enter my manufactory? Didn't I tell you that you couldn't enter unless your religion, whatever it might be, was your own free property? Marry, it is so, and for that I was glad, wherefore it liked me not, and bred in me a cold doubt, to hear of this priest being there. But he isn't a priest, I tell you." The man looked far from satisfied. He said, "He is not a priest, and yet can read." "He is not a priest, and yet can read, yes, and write too, for that matter. I taught him myself." The man's face cleared. "And it is the first thing that you yourself will be taught in that factory." I would give blood out of my heart to know that art. Why, I will be your slave, No, you won't be anybody's slave. Take your family and go along. Your lord the bishop will confiscate your small property, but no matter. Clarence will fix you all right. Chapter 14. Defend thee, Lord. I paid 3 pennies for my breakfast, and a most extravagant price it was, too, seeing that one could have breakfasted a dozen persons for that money. But I was feeling good by this time, and I had always been a kind of spendthrift anyway, and then these people had wanted to give me the food for nothing, scant as their provision was, and so it was a grateful pleasure to emphasize my appreciation and sincere thankfulness with a good big financial lift, where the money would do so much more good than it would in my helmet, where these pennies being made of iron and not stinted in weight, my $50 worth was a good deal of a burden to me. I spent money rather too freely in those days, it is true, but one reason for it was that I hadn't got the proportions of things entirely adjusted, even yet, after so long a sojourn in Britain, hadn't got along to where I was able to absolutely realize that a penny in Arthur's land and a couple of dollars in Connecticut were about one and the same thing, just twins, as you may say, in purchasing power. If my start from Camelot could have been delayed a very few days, I could have paid these people in beautiful new coins from our own mint, and that would have pleased me, and them too not less. I had adopted the American values exclusively. In a week or two now, cents, nickels, dimes, quarters, and half-dollars, and also a trifle of gold, would be trickling in thin but steady streams all through the commercial veins of the kingdom, and I looked to see this new blood freshen up its life. The farmers were bound to throw in something to sort of offset my liberality, whether I would or no, so I let them give me a flint and steel, and as soon as they had comfortably bestowed Sandy and me on our horse, I lit my pipe. When the first blast of smoke shot out through the bars of my helmet, all those people broke for the woods, and Sandy went over backwards and struck the ground with a dull thud. They thought I was one of those fire-belching dragons they had heard so much about from knights and other professional liars. I had infinite trouble to persuade those people to venture back within explaining distance. Then I told them that this was only a bit of enchantment which would work harm to none but my enemies. And I promised, with my hand on my heart, that if all who felt no enmity toward me would come forward and pass before me, they should see that only those who remained behind would be struck dead. The procession moved with a good deal of promptness. There were no casualties to report, for nobody had curiosity enough to remain behind to see what would happen. I lost some time, now, for these big children, their fears gone, became so ravished with wonder over my awe-compelling fireworks that I had to stay there and smoke a couple of pipes out before they would let me go. Still, the delay was not wholly unproductive, for it took all that time to get Sandy thoroughly wanted to the new thing, she being so close to it, you know. It plugged up her conversation mill, too, for a considerable while, and that was a gain. But above all other benefits accruing, I had learned something. I was ready for any giant or any ogre that might come along now. We tarried with a holy hermit that night, and my opportunity came about the middle of the next afternoon. We were crossing a vast meadow by way of shortcut, and I was musing absently, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, when Sandy suddenly interrupted a remark which she had begun that morning with the cry, "Defend thee, Lord, peril of life is toward." And she slipped down from the horse and ran a little way and stood. I looked up and saw, far off in the shade of a tree, half a dozen armed knights and their squires, and straightway there was bustle among them and tightening of saddle girths for the mount. My pipe was ready and would have been lit if I had not been lost in thinking about how to banish oppression from this land and restore to all its people their stolen rights and manhood without disobliging anybody. I lit up at once, and by the time I had got a good head of reserved steam on, here they came. Altogether, too, none of those chivalrous magnanimities which one reads so much about, one courtly rascal at a time, and the rest standing by to see fair play. No, they came in a body, they came with a whir and a rush, they came like a volley from a battery, came with heads low down, plumes streaming out behind, lances advanced at a level. It was a handsome sight, a beautiful sight for a man up a tree. I laid my lance in rest and waited, with my heart beating, till the iron wave was just ready to break over me, then spouted a column of white smoke through the bars of my helmet. You should have seen the wave go to pieces and scatter. This was a finer sight than the other one. But these people stopped 200 or 300 yards away, and this troubled me. My satisfaction collapsed, and fear came. I judged I was a lost man, but Sandy was radiant and was going to be eloquent, but I stopped her and told her my magic had miscarried somehow or other, and she must mount with all dispatch, and we must ride for life. No, she wouldn't. She said that my enchantment had disabled those knights. They were not riding on because they couldn't wait. They would drop out of their saddles presently, and we would get their horses and harness. I could not deceive such trusting simplicity, so I said it was a mistake, that when my fireworks killed at all, they killed instantly. No, the men would not die. There was something wrong about my apparatus. I couldn't tell what, but we must hurry and get away, for those people would attack us again in a minute. Sandy laughed and said, "Lackaday, sir, they be not of that breed. Sir Launcelot will give battle to dragons and will abide by them, and will assail them again, and yet again, and still again, until he do conquer and destroy them. And so likewise will Sir Pellinore and Sir Aglouville and Sir Carados, and mayhap others, but there be none else that will venture it. Let the idle say what the idle will. And la, as to yonder base rufflers, think ye they have not their fill, but yet desire more. Well then, what are they waiting for? Why don't they leave? Nobody's hindering. Good land, I'm willing to let bygones be bygones, I'm sure. Leave, is it? Oh, give thyself easement as to that. They dream not of it, no, not they wait to yield them. Come, really, is that sooth, as you people say? If they want to, why don't they? It would like them much, but an ye wot how dragons are esteemed, ye would not hold them blamable, they fear to come. Well then, suppose I go to them instead, and wit ye well they would not abide your coming, I will go. And she did. She was a handy person to have along on a raid. I would have considered this a doubtful errand myself. I presently saw the knights riding away and Sandy coming back. That was a relief. I judged she had somehow failed to get the first innings, I mean in the conversation, otherwise the interview wouldn't have been so short. But it turned out that she had managed the business well, in fact, admirably. She said that when she told those people I was the boss, it hit them where they lived. Smote them sore with fear and dread was her word, and then they were ready to put up with anything she might require. So she swore them to appear at Arthur's court within 2 days and yield them, with horse and harness, and be my knights henceforth, and subject to my command. How much better she managed that thing than I should have done it myself. She was a daisy. Chapter 15. Sandy's Tale. And so I'm proprietor of some knights, said I, as we rode off. Who would ever have supposed that I should live to list up assets of that sort? I shan't know what to do with them, unless I raffle them off. How many of them are there, Sandy? 7, please you, sir, and their squires. It is a good haul. Who are they? Where do they hang out? Where do they hang out? Yes, where do they live? I understood thee not. That will I tell eftsoons. Then she said musingly and softly, turning the words daintily over her tongue, hang they out, where do they hang out? Right so, where do they hang out? Of a truth the phrase hath a fair and winsome grace, and is prettily worded withal. I will repeat it anon and anon in mine idlesse, whereby I may peradventure learn it. Where do they hang out? Even so, already it falleth trippingly from my tongue, and forasmuch as. Don't forget the cowboys, Sandy. Cowboys. Yes, the knights, you know, you were going to tell me about them. A while back, you remember, figuratively speaking, games called. Game. Yes, go to the bat. I mean, get to work on your statistics, and don't burn so much kindling getting your fire started. Tell me about the knights. I will well, and lightly will begin. So they too departed and rode into a great forest, and Great Scott! You see, I recognized my mistake at once. I had set her works a-going. It was my own fault. She would be 30 days getting down to those facts, and she generally began without a preface and finished without a result. If you interrupted her, she would either go right along without noticing or answer with a couple of words and go back and say the sentence over again. So interruptions only did harm, and yet I had to interrupt, and interrupt pretty frequently, too, in order to save my life. A person would die if he let her monotony drip on him right along all day. Great Scott, I said in my distress. She went right back and began over again. So they too departed and rode into a great forest, and which two? Sir Gawain and Sir Ewain. And so they came to an abbey of monks, and they were well lodged. So on the morn they heard their masses in the abbey, and so they rode forth till they came to a great forest. Then was Sir Gawain ware in a valley by a turret, of 12 fair damsels, and 2 knights armed on great horses, and the damsels went to and fro by a tree. And then was Sir Gawain where how there hung a white shield on that tree, and ever as the damsels came by it, they spit upon it, and some threw mire upon the shield. Now if I hadn't seen the like myself in this country, Sandy, I wouldn't believe it. But I've seen it, and I can just see those creatures now, parading before that shield and acting like that. The women here do certainly act like all possessed. Yes, and I mean your best, too, society's very choicest brands. The humblest hello girl along 10,000 miles of wire could teach gentleness, patience, modesty, manners, to the highest duchess in Arthur's land. Hello girl. Yes, but don't you ask me to explain. It's a new kind of a girl. They don't have them here. One often speaks sharply to them when they are not the least in fault, and he can't get over feeling sorry for it and ashamed of himself in 1300 years. It's such shabby mean conduct and so unprovoked. The fact is, no gentleman ever does it, though I myself, if I've got to confess. Peradventure she. Never mind her, never mind her. I tell you I couldn't ever explain her so you would understand. Even so be it, sith ye are so minded. Then Sir Gawain and Sir Uwaine went and saluted them, and asked them why they did that despite to the shield. Sirs, said the damsels, we shall tell you. There is a knight in this country that owneth this white shield, and he is a passing good man of his hands, but he hateth all ladies and gentlewomen, and therefore we do all this despite to the shield. I will say you, said Sir Gawain, it beseemeth evil a good knight to despise all ladies and gentlewomen, and peradventure though he hate you he hath some cause, and peradventure he loveth in some other places ladies and gentlewomen, and to be loved again, and he such a man of prowess as ye speak of. Man of prowess, yes, that is the man to please them, Sandy. Man of brains, that is a thing they never think of. Tom Sayers, John Heenan, John L. Sullivan, pity but you could be here. You would have your legs under the round table, and a sir in front of your names within the 24 hours, and you could bring about a new distribution of the married princesses and duchesses of the court in another 24. The fact is, it is just a sort of polished-up court of Comanches, and there isn't a squaw in it who doesn't stand ready at the dropping of a hat to desert to the buck, with the biggest string of scalps at his belt. And he be such a man of prowess as ye speak of, said Sir Gawain. Now, what is his name, sir, said they. His name is Marhaus, the king's son of Ireland. Son of the king of Ireland, you mean? The other form doesn't mean anything. And look out and hold on tight now, we must jump this gully. There, we are all right now. This horse belongs in the circus. He is born before his time. I know him well, said Sir Uwaine. He is a passing good knight as any is on live. On live, if you've got a fault in the world, Sandy, it is that you are a shade too archaic, but it isn't any matter. For I saw him once proved at a justs where many knights were gathered, and that time there might no man withstand him. Ah, said Sir Gawain, damsels, methinketh ye are to blame, for it is to suppose he that hung that shield there will not be long therefrom, and then may those knights match him on horseback, and that is more your worship than thus, for I will abide no longer to see a knight's shield dishonoured. And therewith Sir Uwaine and Sir Gawain departed a little from them, and then were they where Sir Marhaus came riding on a great horse straight toward them. And when the 12 damsels saw Sir Marhaus, they fled into the turret as they were wild, so that some of them fell by the way. Then the one of the knights of the tower dressed his shield, and said on high, Sir Marhaus, defend thee. And so they ran together that the knight brake his spear on Marhaus, and Sir Marhaus smote him so hard that he brake his neck and the horse's back. Well, that is just the trouble about this state of things. It ruins so many horses. That saw the other knight of the turret, and dressed him toward Marhaus, and they went so eagerly together that the knight of the turret was soon smitten down, horse and man, stark dead. Another horse gone. I tell you it is a custom that ought to be broken up. I don't see how people with any feeling can applaud and support it. So these two knights came together with great random. I saw that I had been asleep and missed a chapter, but I didn't say anything. I judged that the Irish knight was in trouble with the visitors by this time, and this turned out to be the case. That Sir Uwaine smote Sir Marhaus, that his spear brast in pieces on the shield, and Sir Marhaus smote him so sore that horse and man he bare to the earth, and hurt Sir Uwaine on the left side.